Hi, hello. Excuse me. Hey, Chris.
Hey Randy, how are you?
Good. I think it's good afternoon where you are. Joe, good afternoon to you.
Yep, good
All right.
afternoon.
And wherever folks watching us are, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever wherever the location finds you. Uh, excuse me. I need to start off by apologizing. All week, my neighbors have been doing construction and quietly and nicely. And today they are doing something loud. So if we get an abnormal amount of background noise in my audio, I'll try to keep myself muted as much as possible. Uh, excuse me. By way of introduction, you may have seen for the folks watching a few weeks ago, Joe and Chris were both on with me. We were doing a topic of data governance, and it was pretty interesting and got a kind of a nice peek into the IBM Manta product. And we're intrigued enough by it that we decided we could dedicate a little bit more time to it and something product specific rather than just topic specific. So we do want to dive into that. I'm really anxious to get into the guts of this. Before I do, I wrote down a note from feedback from my our producer from last time. She said, "Let everyone introduce themselves." So instead of me just saying your names, Chris and Joe, I'll ask you guys to take it away and go ahead and do a couple introductions, please.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Chris Murray. I'm a worldwide data lineage specialist here at IBM, and I came over to IBM via the Manta acquisition that they completed late last year. So, happy to be here.
And hello, everyone. My name's Joe Chmielewski. I also came over via the Manta acquisition. I am a technical product specialist here, specializing in data lineage. I was a lead solutions architect at Manta prior to the acquisition, so I've been working with this particular space for a number of years now.
Excellent. All right, I do want to dive in to see this directly, and I promise in our long-standing tradition we will not make this a half hour or 45-minute slideshow presentation. But I understand we do have some intro slides just to kind of level set where Manta is coming from, what the kind of background need that spawned the idea of Manta is from, and give us uh, some entry into the use cases we'll be seeing here in the demo. So I know who wants to take care of the slides here.
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead and do that. So,
All right, thank
bear
you.
with me here. Alrighty. Is that coming through okay?
Yes, it
Yes.
is.
Alrighty. Perfect. Perfect. So, like Randy mentioned, what we're gonna quickly do, don't want to bore anybody or bog anybody down with too many slides here, but kind of give you an introduction to Manta as a platform itself. Talk a little bit about, why we started this platform, where it's going, some of the use cases, and then I'll be passing the baton on over to Joe, who's gonna go ahead and showcase, the platform itself. So let's first start off with what we kind of see in the market. So typical enterprise data ecosystem. So, as we all know, time and time again, environments are only becoming more complex, are constantly changing, which then leads to a lack of knowledge and documentation across the board. So whether you have a lot of on-prem data sources, legacy systems, then maybe you're moving things to more SaaS-based or cloud-based, doing a lot of modernizations, migrations, bringing in new tools for integration. A lot of that stuff ends up getting misaligned with your documentation. Some folks, they may have had, all of this knowledge in their head, and then due to turnover, all that tribal knowledge is then lost. And, one of the main ways and reasons to get this information back into the hands of its users so that you can actually, make informed data decisions and insights is utilizing data lineage. And let's kind of talk a little bit about, what Manta does and how it enables you from a data lineage perspective. So, Manta at its core competency has always been focused on data lineage. So, helping organizations understand exactly how their data is flowing from source through sophisticated intermediary steps all the way out to their desired targets, basically giving them an end to end mapping flow view of their data's life cycle. And with this, since Manta's whole core competency has always been focused on that, we then have the ability to get down to the level of detail and utilize the user interface that Joe is going to show you guys today to make any of these decisions to also help drive how data lineage can enable your organization further. And Manta's been in the space for quite some time. Again, core focus, and we've been a leader in that space. The way that differentiates us is Manta's ability to read code across platforms to be able to build out these interactive mappings for you. And with this, what it's really enabling organizations to do, so not only some of the use cases that we're going to talk about in the future here, but also being able to unravel that complexity that you may have today. You may have black boxes all across your environment and pipelines, and it's then leads to using your resources to complete sort of manual activities. So you want to be able to have the ability to save time, resources, which ultimately equals dollars for your organization. But let's talk a little bit about, how does Manta work? So Manta itself gets installed out onto its own single host. We also do have a software as a service offering as well. From there, what we do is we go through a couple different steps to build you those pretty useful information data flows so that you can make these informed decisions. So once we've installed the software itself, from there, what we do is we connect out to all of your different disparate data resources. So think about things like your databases, data warehouses, ETL tools, BI, and reporting mechanisms of such. Then from there, this is kind of where the magic happens behind the scenes. What Manta is going to do is it's going to extract all of that metadata information for you. So we're going to pull out, the underlying DDL, all of your views, triggers, functions, stored procedures, read through the ETL logic, and then all the way down to your reporting systems so that you have that end-to-end mapping view. Once we've extracted all of that information, what happens behind the scenes is that we reverse engineer and we parse through the physical code. So again, Manta itself is only ever looking at metadata, never taking a look at any sort of data values. From there, once we see how all of that information is interconnected, we then push all of that into our highly parameterized and filterized user interface that Joe is going to showcase for us today. And some of those components that you're going to see within the UI are an asset repository tree that allows you to peruse through all the different technologies you've scanned in and branch that tree out to a column or field level of choosing, so you can get very granular when it comes time for your data lineage search. Then you're going to be able to use those different filtering mechanisms to make that lineage consumable. So, Randy, there's a variety of different users when it comes to data lineage. So you're going to have folks maybe more on the business side who need to understand, hey, what was the ultimate source of this data? Or maybe you have somebody on the engineering and architecture side who really needs to get into the weeds a bit. They need to understand the column to column movements, the stored procedure steps, any of the transformation logic, and being able to view that in a holistic way so you can see everything from A to Z. Randy, any questions that you want to ask on that piece there?
Yeah, actually, I think you just addressed the first thing I wanted to set for anybody that might be watching, right? Is when we talk about, well, you can do this or you can do that, is who's going to get to use Manta, right? And when we talk about doing the install and we start talking about some of the in the weed stuff, it often seems like, oh, this is an IT tool. And certainly there's some of that. Somebody has to click the next button on the install screen, right? But I think you're going to come up with use cases. The tool itself is really for use, as you said, by data engineers and people who need to kind of get their hands dirty doing ETL and writing code and whatnot to know where to do it, but also from somebody from accounting or somebody from purchasing or somebody from the shop floor that needs to look at inventory and is looking at reports and doesn't know where stuff is coming from, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And, being able to utilize those filtering mechanisms to make it consumable, across all different types of user groups, because you want to be able to have folks diving into the application themselves to answer questions that maybe beforehand they used to have to, Slack or email or go find somebody at their desk, really allowing for more transparency across the board. Awesome. So let's kind of dive into just a little bit more about, how Manta and Lineage would fit into your organization. So again, as you can see there, you have all those different disparate data resources down there at the bottom. Then you go through that automated extraction and analysis component, and then pushing that to our data lineage UI. From there, you have some different user groups in the top right-hand side there, the ability to utilize the Manta APIs, But what really helps separate Manta as well is being able to integrate within your normal data ecosystem and within your infrastructure of different tools that you're using today. So say you have an enterprise data catalog that you're using, and even if it's not IBM's data catalog, you still have the ability to integrate out of the box with a variety of different players, so that Manta will push all of its harvested metadata information and attach it right to the assets in your data catalog to help bring you even more additional insights. You'll also then have the ability to leverage different things within the platform that Joe will show today. That'll show how you can juxtapose data quality scores on top of your lineage, or maybe PII information. All of this done via one of Manta's core features called active tags. So you have lots of different options for viewing, consuming, and making this available to everyone across the board. But let's dive into what some of these use cases are here. So we like to kind of bucketize these use cases into three core pillars and then branch out from there. So first you have, your data governance use cases. I would say that this is kind of the way that I see the largest entry point of users wanting to be able to have a data lineage solution to use to answer different questions, to meet regulatory compliance audits, to enhance data management, and all things like that. So with that, I would say that's one of the core use cases that we're always seeing across the board, because when you boil down a lot of the legal nomenclature from a regulatory audit, that is going to be, one of the main things that affects an organization. You really want to be able to say, I know where my data came from, what's happening to it, where it's going, where it ends up, and who's using it. And data lineage really empowers you to be able to answer any of those questions and being able to meet that regulatory audit. Same thing goes for cloud migrations and modernizations. One of the longest components to a modernization or migration project is always that setup and planning phase, because you may not know what you have today. There's going to be a lot of different duplicate databases out there, or maybe you need to sunset some different solutions. So it's really going to help you answer some of those critical questions, like what is critical to recreate, what is redundant, what can be deprecated, and then being able to maintain a historical log as you're running your lineage solution to see how things have been changing over time. And with this, it's going to help speed up your migration and modernization efforts tenfold. And whether that be, something as simple as, you're migrating one ETL tool to another, maybe you're doing a ground to cloud shift, all of this is going to be super helpful when you have that interactive map showing you the path forward. Then data ops use cases. And with data ops use cases, we see these a lot. It's going to be a little bit different from your traditional data ops use case. But with Manta, you have the ability to be more proactive across your software development lifecycle. So whether that be running an impact assessment proactively, so that when we're going to go ahead and make a change during this release cycle, we know exactly what's going to be impacted downstream, who we can notify, or what's it for potential for breaking. Then on the inverse of that, you have your incident resolution and root cause analysis. So what this is going to really replace is having your engineers or architects having to manually comb through the code to figure out what broke something. You now have the ability to utilize Manta and one of its core features that Joe's also going to show, which is revision and revision history. You have the ability to see 2 different points in time, how your pipelines have been flowing, what's been added, changed, removed, to really help solve any of those typically manual processes via automation, and then integrate those directly into your QA processes. Brandy, any questions on any of those use cases or anything you want me to dive into more?
No, I was kind of chuckling because at the bottom of your slide, right, across everything, it says strengthen AI. And we can't do a live stream unless we use the letters AI somewhere. So green check mark, right? So one of the things, though, that I've seen along the way, watching a lot of these presentations, and most presentations now do have some AI component, and very consistently, the concept of data governance comes up, and one of the key words that comes up all the time is transparency. And I think that word applies kind of across the board to these use cases and to Manta at large. Like you said before, if I had the question, where did this come from? I might have to go track somebody down. I might have to log a ticket. I might have to, get lost in all the kind of bureaucracy and confusion about where things are and how they lay out. And being able to get that myself is a time saver. But even if I can't, being able to let somebody else have this visual, I think is just really powerful. So that whole idea of transparency really resonates with me. I'm very, very keen on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I think is neat, I don't want to take time away. I want to get in, Joe, and let you show this off. But I keep envisioning kind of the way things, I'd say, used to be, right? Where if you were trying to do this data lineage, you might have an Excel workbook, or you might have large printouts of multiple, pieces of paper on the cube wall, ERD diagrams and different databases, with an arrow pointing one to the other. But that was it. And you might have, the black box that says this is where stuff happens, but not be able to see into it. So you don't know what the stuff is. And so, Joe, I know you're going to show it, but I'm looking forward to seeing that as well, where you don't just say, "Oh, here's the 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 way that the data is being transported from point A to point D," but along the way we do this transformation, and it's a stored procedure, or if it's a rename or something like that. To make that accessible, really powerful stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how much more you've got on slides, but it might be a good time to jump into the product and take a look, because
Yeah,
I've been talking about so much
absolutely.
here.
Yeah, now let me stop sharing my screen here and let's get into the fun stuff. Joe, I will pass the baton on over to you to bring up the demo.
Sure, thanks, Chris. So let me go ahead and present. Just a couple of clicks here to get that to that point. All right, would you be able to give me verbal confirmation you can see my screen?
Good to go.
Yep, good to go.
Very good. So now what we're looking at here is the Manta Flow Viewer application. So as Chris has mentioned, after this would be set up within your environment, we configure the connections to go to those different disparate resources. You run what's called a scan, where Manta extracts all of the appropriate metadata from all the different technologies. It pulls it onto the Manta server for analysis. Keyword in that whole kind of phrasing is metadata. We're not pulling the underlying data values, so you're not seeing any type of sensitive information being transmitted across the network, no John Doe or Jane Smith type details, but rather we're getting the actual DDL from the relational databases, the ETL jobs from the ETL tools, as well as the reports from the reporting applications. And then we're parsing those different components to generate data lineage from them all and connect them all together within your ecosystem. So once that process has happened behind the scenes, your end users are able to log into this application here and be presented with something very similar to what we're looking at right now. So what we have is a repository tree view on our left-hand side, which groups out all the different assets that we've included within our scans. And we group those assets together by their technology. So for example, if you had DB2 resources you want to investigate further, you can drill into your DB2 folder, see the different servers we've connected to. The servers house databases, the databases house schemas, tables, views, columns, triggers, stored procedures, etc. So you could traverse through this repository to find specific assets of interest, or you can use our search box here at the top. So you can just enter in a specific object name. So I'm going to enter in customers, because that's my go-to asset for my demonstrations. So here's my customers
Joe,
search
let me,
box. Sure,
sorry to interrupt you there. If you don't mind, along the way, if I pop in with a question or two. But
absolutely.
you've got a pretty decent tree over there on the left-hand side. Is there a limit to that, or can I just keep? I know there's licensing considerations, but just from the technology, can I just point this as many servers as I need to do the job?
Essentially, yes. You could have as many of these resources on your left-hand side as you desire. So there's no necessary limitation that I've run into in terms of different connections. I've have accounts that do several hundred, even into the thousands of different connections. So if you have it in your environment, Manta has an out-of-the-box parser for it. You'll be able to include it in your analysis and then see it here on the left-hand side in the repository.
And if I want to connect, let you keep going here just a moment, but to do that connection, um, I know you mentioned we're not pulling any data in, which is important, right? Because we want to keep that data secure. What kind of permissions do I need on those data connections? Is it just read access?
Essentially, yes. You just need read access. Manta is not writing anything to the different repositories. Not all repositories, of course, have just a read-only level of permissioning. So the different permissioning will vary based on the underlying technology you're connecting to.
Sure, but the sources are safe. Manta's not doing anything to the source, right?
That's correct.
Cool. All right,
Very good.
I'll let you go again.
Sure. Thank you. Feel free to interject though. So what we have is essentially we searched for that string up top, and it gave me back a list of different assets which meets that search criteria here. Maybe I have 17, maybe I have 170. I want to filter this down in most cases, so I want to use one of these different filter options we have up top, where I can either select the technology that's associated with, or I can select maybe the object type. So I'm looking for a report object. When I type report here, it gives me back all the different categories which match that search term. So there we go. I'm grabbing all of my report objects now, and we can see that that result list has been reduced to a single object here. If I click on it, let's say I had multiples of these and I wanted to understand exactly which one applied for my particular use case, I could click on it like I just did right here and see the element details view to just validate that this is in fact the asset that I'm looking to visualize my data lineage around. In our particular scenario, it is. So all we need to do is just hover over the object and then click on this little plus icon. And when I do that, the object gets moved into my selected for lineage area here in the lower right hand side. So you see now I have a customer's report in here. If I desired for whatever reason to grab maybe another object, we could do the same process, rinse and repeat to find another asset to throw into my selected for lineage area and render multiple data flows at one time. I recommend, for my own personal experience, going down to the most granular level of detail, meaning a column, a field, a metric level, and visualizing lineage there, because it's going to be far more easy for you to understand and interpret the lineage that gets generated within the diagram. It's just going to be a lot less of information presented at one time, so you'll get down to the view that you're looking for with the least number of clicks. Now, for our scenario, I know this customer's report lineage is not incredibly complex. I'm going to grab the entirety of this report, and then I'm going to visit this visualization parameter section here just to make sure that it doesn't generate too much information for me by clicking on this settings icon. So Manta has the ability to modify the amount of information or the level of detail that we're presenting to the user within the diagrams. Right now I have it set to low. If I wanted, I can increase it to high, or I can go down to the resource level. We're going to leave this defined as low for our first visualization. This will allow us to get a general understanding of how the data lineage is moving across the ecosystem without giving us so much information that it becomes overwhelming. So all these other fields I'm going to leave alone. I'm not going to modify any of these. I'm just going to go ahead and click on the Show Lineage and Graph button because I've selected my customer's report, so I'm good to go. All right. So what we have here is a basic flow for that customer's report. Our customer's report is shown here with this black color theme that tells me that this is the point of origin for the visualization. This is what it built the visualization around. And we see this customer's report is linked up to all these other boxes on our screen that have all these other lines and arrows associated with them. Each collection of these boxes are representing different objects within your ecosystem, which share the data flows that feed into that customer's report. So if the data is moving from each one of these assets within the ecosystem, we'll visualize it as one of these collections of boxes. The boxes are collected together, or linked together by these lines and arrows. That's denoting how the data is moving from one object to the next. Now, since this is a low level of detail, what Manta is doing is it's collapsing a lot of the lineage into these higher level boxes. And essentially what we're showing is kind of schema to schema level detail. If we just kind of look in the center of our screen, what I'll do is I'll explain a bit about the hierarchy of these boxes so that makes a little bit more sense to those who might not be familiar with this. What we have is kind of this Russian doll level of nesting, where the highest level is the parent object, and that is the technology. So this is the MSSQL technology. It's a relational database. It has a child of a database. That's the Manta database. And the Manta database has a child of the DWH schema. So I can read this as there's an MSSQL resource, Manta database, and a DWH schema. And that DWH schema shares these relationships with these other objects within the ecosystem. Now, this is a good time to point out, you might notice that some of these objects have different color themes applied to them. That's our cue to the user that these represent different categories of technology. For example, the MSSQL example is a relational database, and it's shown here in that kind of bluish gray coloring. We have bluish gray boxes on the left-hand side. These are Oracle relational databases. So this color theming is telling me that these are my relational database technologies versus this red salmonish color. This is telling me that these are ETL tools. So if we do that same kind of look at the level of nesting at the highest level, it tells us the technology it's representing. This is SSIS ETL tool. So that's Microsoft's ETL tool. Here in the middle, I have IFPCs. This is Informatica Power Center ETL tool. So two different technologies, but they're both within the same color theming because they have the same category of resource which they're representing. And then the far right-hand side for that customer's report, this is a reporting application, so it gets that teal color theming applied to it. At the highest level, we see that this is SSRS. All of these kind of specifics, whether it be the color themes, the representations of the boxes or the lines, they're all broadly applicable for all the supported technologies, meaning if you had Snowflake, if you had S3, if you had a different ETL tool such as DataStage, they'd all have the same representation of the object structure, the lines linking together the objects, and the color themes being applied to them to identify the specific category of technology which they represent. So this is broadly applicable across all the technologies which Manta supports. Just wanted to make sure I threw that out there. Now, what we were talking about a little bit earlier is two components to this. One component is lineage that is cross-technology related, and that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing SSRS technology to MSSQL all the way out to Oracle. So we see all these different lineage lines connected together. And then the second component of this is understanding what's in these black boxes, because right now all of these things are really just black boxes. We're just showing kind of at the high level what technologies are interacting with what. So Manta, for the first point, is able to connect together all of these different lineage lines across these technologies programmatically. So we're not requiring any users to define that Oracle shares a relationship with MS SQL. But because we're able to scan these intermediary steps within the ETL tools, it's able to detect that the data lineage is going across these applications, and then it's able to connect these lineage lines programmatically. So your users don't have to do any of that manual definition, but rather they're able to just come into the screen here, generate the visualization diagram around their specific asset of interest, and Manta will do the rest. We'll connect lineage flows across those technologies and present it to you in a single screen here, giving you the full end-to-end view of your lineage flow. Now, to get into more of the black box areas, we can do one of two things. What you'll notice is there's these little plus icons kind of peppered throughout the visualization. These are indicating that there's additional lineage below this level that we're showing here. And if we click on them, we'll see what that lineage looks like. So I click on that, you'll see I start to expose more information within the ETL tool. So we'll start to see component level of detail. We'll start to see what those components are doing. So as I click, I'm getting a more and more sophisticated diagram. And when I get down to the lowest level, you notice I'm at the column flow. So I can go all the way down to the column flow and understand exactly how each one of these columns are moving throughout the ecosystem within even the ETL components themselves. So this is no longer black box to me. Now I actually know what's going on here. I know in this case of SSIS, what ISPAC holds what DTSX file, holds what components, and how those components interact with the column flow levels throughout the job that's being run. Do you have any questions? Does this make sense, Randy, or is there anything maybe I glossed over too quickly?
I was kind of chuckling again because I think maybe one of the prerequisites for installing Manta should be having a really large monitor. If you see me leaning forward, I'm trying to read this on my laptop screen. It's a little small, but the other thing I was thinking is, boy, if you ever had to justify like why something doesn't happen immediately, I'm envisioning the person on the right-hand side of this who's looking at a report that says customer name and saying, well, can't you just do this? And well, it's a little bit more complex. We've got 2 different Oracle sources and 3 ETL steps, and this lays that out really nicely. I suspect where you're going next is to say what those ETL steps are, but I'm enjoying this so far. I really find this already a lot easier than try to replicate this in Excel technique.
Oh, absolutely. This can be quite challenging to try to replicate within any manual means
Right.
of effort. It'll become difficult to do, time consuming, and then hard to maintain over time as individuals are making changes to these ETL packages or maybe the code applications that Manta is scanning. So that's kind of a part of the Manta. The Manta's value is that we're able to do this all programmatically and then run the scans intermittently when you need them to be done. So if somebody releases an update to a specific package or a specific area of the ecosystem, we can rescan it and then get the latest information available back into the Manta application. So that's
It's
actually a
probably
good.
worth a. I know you mentioned this, but I'll call back to it. Right. So you're not pulling any data in,
Mhm.
right? And so the business data is safe where it belongs back in the database. Um, and by the same token, I if I'm thinking about that person on the right who started off looking at a report, they don't necessarily care about what's going on under the hood for the ETL steps, but we can we can let them see maybe as much as they need to
Mhm.
because the data is safe, and then because Manta's not writing, they're not they can go and poke around and say, oh look, a stored procedure, but they can't change that stored procedure, right? As there's no code being generated or being written here to change any of these objects.
That's correct. This is all housed within the Manta ecosystem. And to that point, let's drill into our relational database and show exactly kind of what you're describing. When I click to expand that DWH schema, we see a lot of table level nodes being exposed here. So now we have table lineage throughout the ecosystem. But some of these little boxes here, they have a specific icon with that PX. So this looks like an Excel spreadsheet, these icons. This PX is telling me this is a stored procedure icon. So if I click on that, we can drill into the stored procedures themselves. So maybe the user wants to understand exactly what you're just describing. I have a table here, I want to build a report off of it, or maybe modify my customer's report to have additional information. I know this information is coming from this rep client table, and now I know that it's actually being placed there by this stored procedure. And I can actually get to that logic of what's this stored procedure doing from within the screen as well. What we see here is I have these blue TT icons, which are indicating to me, the user, that there's transformations occurring at these column flow levels. So when there's no blue TT icon, it's just a movement of data one to one. So we're just taking data from the left and moving it to the right. But where the TT icons come up, I know that there's transformations occurring. I can hover over these TT icons and actually get the transformation logic associated at the column flow level. So this logic is telling me that my rep client table has a customer name column, and it's being set to my party H table's first name and my party H table's family name values concatenated. So if I just kind of move away from that, we see that's my rep client table, and then there's my customer name column. If I click on that, we'll track the lineage upstream to say, okay, there's my party H table. Let's expand that out, and there's my first name and my family name columns that we located in that logical description that's generated the source information for my customer name column here downstream. You might also notice that when I'm clicking on these, there's some highlights being applied. We see blue highlights. That's to visually track the data flow from that specific element upstream. So blue is telling me these are upstream data movements. And then I also have red highlights that are telling me that these are downstream or dependency data movements from my selected asset. If you have users too that are very technical and they like to see the SQL, they don't just want to see how the lineage is put together or even the logical descriptions here. They want to see the code that was analyzed. They can do that within this viewer as well. Just by double clicking on it, we're able to pull open this stored procedure. We see there's an insert statement that's creating that rep client table. Here's all those columns. If we scroll down a touch, we see there's my customer name column that we're just looking at. There's that logical expression that we just took a peek at that generates the values which go into there. And there's a lot of other really good information inside of here. You can see that Manta is able to parse these inner join statements. There's some where clauses. There's some sophisticated syntactical usages within this code that Manta is able to parse and then visualize accordingly. Also, if this is like maybe a several hundred or thousand line piece of code, you can just hit Control F and search for specific values within the code base here. So if I wanted to search for client, I could look there. I just searched for client, and then it came up, it highlights all the clients. So we have syntax highlighting as well as search and capabilities to bring you exactly where you need to go within this viewer. You never have to leave the UI here. And to your point, you can't modify or change any of this, right? You can't break it. So if you wanted to give your users access to this, they can see it, they can touch it, they can feel it, but they can't break it. So you don't have to be worried about them modifying something that breaks downstream data dependencies or pipelines. Alrighty, very, very good. So before we kind of went into that tangent, I mentioned about how you're able to schedule and run these different scans at different times, depending upon when you've updated areas of your ecosystem. I want to talk a little bit more about that because that's quite helpful and a very valuable piece of capabilities that Manta brings to the table. So when you scan a new area of your ecosystem, Manta takes those results and it kind of layers it on top of the prior results that we had. So it'll update any data flows that were modified or changed. It'll update the schemas that have any additions or subtractions to them. You'll get the most recent view of that lineage information when you log into Manta and generate it with your most recent scan result set. But we don't just toss the prior scan results. We actually store those in our repository as well. And we allow your users to pull that information up when they desire. So a reason why you might want to do that is maybe you have this customer's report and someone comes to you and says, look, I need you to give me the data lineage for the metrics in this report because we need to understand exactly how some of the calculations were made. Well, this report was provided to them maybe in January of 2024, and there's really no indication that the lineage hasn't changed since then. The lineage may be completely different in November, December of 2025 than it was from January. So we not only need to see the lineage, but we need to see the lineage as it looked back when this report was generated in January. So to do that, we have that capability in Manta. We're going to go back to the prior screen. We have what's called a revision set. So essentially what that means is we store the results of your scans in our repository as a revision. So every new scan creates a new revision. And if you wanted to go back in time to see what your ecosystem looked like, or your data lineage looked like at a prior state, we can just choose the older revision and see exactly how the data lineage was architected at that moment where the scan was executed. So what I did there is I chose an older revision. I went back way before January, though. I went back to 2018. You can see my ecosystem was much, much smaller. And if I wanted to, I could just find a specific resource of interest and I could go ahead and generate the lineage accordingly, just as we were seeing before. So we saw that same DWH schema, all these columns and tables, etc. in there. I can click and drag it into here, and we can see the lineage and say, hey, this is how it looked when the report was generated for whatever time frame they're requesting. And now they have that information for whatever research they're working on providing. So that's one advantage of having these revisions or this revisions drop-down menu capability. But we also have the scenario where maybe someone comes to you and says, I don't necessarily need to see how the lineage looked in January. I need to see how the lineage looked at a prior state in time when I had a working data pipeline, because we've identified that our data is no longer being refreshed. So at some point, we know the data was working. We know maybe it worked last month, but it's no longer working, and something is broken since that last month pipeline to our today's pipeline. We need to do a revisions comparison. We need to see how these two different states in time vary from one to the next. So to do that, we can also use this revisions capability. I'm going to choose a specific revision here. I'm going to go here. I know that there's a broken data pipeline. This is the lineage for that broken data pipeline. I want to go ahead and click this compare revisions button to choose an earlier state where I had a working data pipeline. Okay, very good. And then I'm going to choose that same report. So maybe that customer's report that we're looking at didn't have proper hydration. The data wasn't being properly hydrated. It was just stale data. And now we need to go into here and understand what happened with those data pipelines from the prior working state compared to our current not working state. As I always do, I like to check these visualization parameters here. This all looks good. I'm going to leave those alone then. I have my customer's report. Let's go ahead and show lineage and graph. When I do that, Manta generates a new diagram for me. This time what we see is all those blues, those reds, those teals, etc., those have all been abstracted away from these different boxes, and all the boxes are grayed out. This graying out is telling me that these objects have had no modifications or changes made to them from the prior revision compared to the current revision I've selected. But we have some active tags here. We mentioned the active tags showing the transformation logic, highlighting the specific attributes of interest for that area of the ecosystem. But we also have active tags that highlight areas where it's detected changes. So I have this green plus icon and this red slash icon. These are telling me that changes were detected inside of the schema. So let's go into the schema and see what's happening. Okay, so what I can see is I have two groupings of columns with red font coloring and a slash icon, and green font coloring and a plus icon. So the red and the slash are telling me that these have been deleted or modified, while the green and the plus are telling me that these have been added or updated. So now I can tell that this is where the changes were made. So my data pipeline is probably happening due to this, my data pipeline breakage. So now I can go and say, well, what's actually pulling from this? Oh, I can see that it's an SSIS package. I can see the DTSX file and the actual components within that DTSX file that are sourcing from these data points. I want to go to this SSIS ETL owner now and make sure that their code is written properly to reflect the new naming conventions that the CRM client table has implemented from a prior working state to a current broken state of the data pipeline, because this is most likely the cause of my issues. And I can kind of work from there. So anybody who's using these specific columns here, if they're referencing them directly, I need to make sure, again, they're using the appropriate nomenclature for their queries so that the data is coming accordingly from the source location and move downstream to the point of consumption. I'll take a second to pause. Randy, is this all making sense, or is this flowing properly for you, if you believe?
It is. And you know what was interesting just about that last bit you were talking about is, you know, as I sit here in front of a laptop, you know, I can kind of nodding along and saying, well, yeah, that's what I would do. And it's nice that it's automated, but it's what I would do, right? I would just work my way backwards till I found something different. Um, and then have to step back and say, but you know, in an actual enterprise situation, that one, that's a lot more complex, and two, you might not have access, right, to all these different things, and I might not be able to go back to the Oracle database or the SSIS package, and you know, I'd have to call someone else to do that. So having the, like, again, not business data, but the metadata available to me, uh, really be a time saver there for me. I like that idea quite a bit. Um, and I love the idea to go back and say what's different, because it's very easy to find something broken, but to find out, well, why wasn't it broken, right? Why wasn't it broken in January, to your example, is huge, because that leads to the resolution. Um, the other thing I'm thinking of, maybe you're going to touch on this. Realize we're at about a quarter till here, so I don't want to take too much of your time by asking questions, but it would this apply, I guess, as well to a dev test prod kind of scheme where I want to make a change, right? So I've got a dev environment and I'm going to make that change back in one of the source systems. And I just want to see, as it flows through, what will this change affect, right?
Absolutely. So in that case, we don't necessarily want to do comparison, because comparison is not going to give us the information that we're looking for. But what we'll do is we'll just take the asset that maybe we want to make a modification to. So like, let's say we're in Oracle and we want to go and find a table here. I have a CD country table. I want to modify one of these particular values. I could grab the table and say, okay, well, let's see who's using this information from CD country. And I'm going to make sure I have this little checkbox here saying visualize indirect flows enabled. That's going to be key. And let's talk a little bit about what that is within the visualization. We don't need to compare revision, so we'll get rid of that. Let's make sure that's still good. Yep, good, good, good. All right, very nice. So what I've done here is I've shown a low level of detail for the CD country table. Now, what we can see is I have two different lines coming off of the columns from this table. I'm doing research to make sure that if I change anything, I don't break anything downstream that's a dependency of this specific asset. So these two different lines are telling me two bits of information that are important. So this solid lineage line We call these edges. So if you ever hear me refer to it as an edge, that's what I'm referencing. These two solid lineage edges are representing direct data lineage movements into my Informatica Power Center ETL tool. And we can expand that out and see the column level. Okay. But I have this blue dashed lineage line here, which is telling me some additional bits of information. This is telling me that there's no direct data lineage movement going down from country name. So none of these specific assets that are sourcing information from here are pulling country name out of it, but rather it's being used to filter the flow of information into all of these other fields. So if I click on this lineage edge and I go into the element details box, it's telling me, yep, this is a type of filter. So the information is being filtered as it flows downstream. Well, that makes sense. Maybe I don't want to see everything from every country. I only want to see information coming from a specific country name, USA, CAD, whatever that is. If I click on this actual parent node, I can get the query here. And if I pop the query out, you'll see there's probably, yep, there's my where clause on country name. So I want to pull information and join it on country name where country name equals some specific value. So that's essentially what's happening here. We're filtering the flow of information on a specific data point when a logical expression is true. And this continues on downstream into this other next filter. We could see a little bit more information on that. So I can see the region that it's filtering it on is Europe. So it's telling me to only move data downstream when the region is set to Europe. And then when it is set to Europe, great, move all this information into the next hop downstream. So Manta is able to detect these direct data lineage movements as well as these indirect data lineage movements, highlight them for the user. So now if I make a change to this, I know, oh, I can't change country name because it's going to break all of these data flows. I can leave it alone, maybe add some fields to this table. And if I add columns to it, then I can reference the information properly without breaking any of these data flows. So having all the appropriate information at your fingertips is going to be critical before you're making any of those changes from your dev to your prod environment, because it's just going to prevent any type of those impacts from happening. And if you don't have indirect data lineage outlined, you could easily overlook this, modify this, and you've broken all the logic that you have coded in here so far.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, boy, that's a really great example because it's such a sneaky one, right? You can imagine very smugly saying, oh, nobody used customer names, so we'll just go ahead and rename that because it's not used in a direct like A to B mapping. But when you look at this and you can see, aha, it is, right? It's in the filter. Boy, that's a time saver if you can see that in advance, right?
Exactly. So that was a great segue, and I want to make sure I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. I think it was only supposed to go till 45 after a quarter of, so I can stop sharing and see if there's any additional questions or talking points that Chris, you wanted to mention before we wrap this all up.
Nothing from my side. Randy, is there anything else that we can help answer today?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things like if I were putting myself on the other side of the screen and I were just starting to get familiar with Manta, the big question that you guys already answered, right, is am I exposing any business data? The answer is no, which is great. I can imagine a case where there might even be, say, a database or a database schema, which some people might have access to and be able to know about, and others may not, whether it's because it's proprietary or whatever reason. I suppose there's some level of security of the metadata within Manta.
Yes, there's permissioning. So essentially, you can say I have n number of user groups, and specific user groups can access specific areas of the ecosystem. So maybe I have a user group that can only access Oracle and MS SQL, and another user group that can only access Snowflake. And even within Snowflake, they can only access this schema within Snowflake. You can provision and add those permissions to those users, those groupings, so that they only have the ability to see what you want them to be able to see.
Yeah, I think that's really important, right? And maybe that's an edge case. And like I said, I like transparency, so I just want to see everything. But I have to face the reality that not everybody is always able to see everything. So being able to secure even at that metadata level, even though the business data is not there, is I think just a really important point. So glad you brought that up or were able to answer that. Excuse me. Yeah, I think that this was a great demo, and because I mentioned last time around, I'm a big fan of the tool. I think we're probably about ready to wrap, unless, I don't know, Chris or Joe, if you have any last minute thoughts or anything you want to leave people with.
No real last minute thoughts. Only thing I would say is, if you're starting to go down, your data lineage journey within your organization, feel free to reach out to Joe and myself, reach out to Randy so that we can, start conversations with you guys, get an understanding of where you're at in your analytical maturity so that we can help out and get you rolling on your data lineage journey.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, we're at PMsquare, pmsquare.com. I think Angie's probably got all our contact information in the comments. And well, it was great having you guys on. Thanks again for coming back. I'm a big fan of the product, and I know we did this before, so it's a bit repetitive, but I really appreciate you coming on. And Chris, your commentary, Joe, great demo. Really great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Randy.
Thank you.
All right. Take it easy. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Guys.